Good morning. This is part 2 of percent. I'm your instructor, Mr. P, aka Stanley Pitchford. My Math 020 students know this is another the percents. This is the percents part of the percent 7.1 trilogy. This is part 2, the sequel. So percents part 2. Let's line it up. Hold on. So what we have here is percents part 2. Basically, we got to talk about the other things. Well, we talked about fraction to percent, percent to fraction. But what about percent, changing the percent to the decimal? So suppose we got something like 1/2%, and we got to change that to the decimal. Well, since we got to change everything, since we got to change the decimals, why don't we change everything to a decimal? So 1/2 is 0.5, and the percent sign means 1%, meaning 1 penny, which is 0.01, or 1/100th. But since we write them as decimals, we got to think about it like chapter 5 was, right? When you multiply two decimals, it's 1 place behind the decimal point here, 2 places behind her. So that's a total of 3, right? And 5 times 1 is 5. So decimal points start here on 5, but then you got to go 3 places to the left, right? As the decimal point, as chapter 5 said, 1, 2, 3. So the answer is this. That's not bad, right? So now we're going to drop down to going back the other way. Decimal to percent. Decimal to percent. Well, 1.8 times 100, right? Well, it's just like going from fraction to percent. When you're going fraction to percent, you multiply whatever the fraction was by 100. Well, it's the same deal, because fraction is a decimal is another fraction pretty much. So you can multiply the decimal by 100. But when you do that, it moves the decimal point to the right 2 places. So 1, 2. So instead of you going to the left, this time you're going to the right, because it makes the number bigger. So that means you'll take 180, right? 1.8. And then move up 1, 2. So you'll take 1.8 and then move the decimal points over 1, 2. That way it becomes 180, right? So that's the other step that I missed right here. When you multiply this by 100, remember the decimal point, your powers of 10 tell you move to the right too. So this is why it becomes 180. Okay, let's look at some other examples. A lot of other examples we got here. So now we're to the PDF example. So we're doing a PDF file example now. Percents, decimals, and fractions. So you're given the percent. Suppose you was given this and you had to change it to the other things, right? So you had to go from the percent to the decimal to the fraction, right? Well, if it's 60%, right, to write it as a decimal, you could just say 60 is the decimal number and the percent sign is 0.01, remember, because we're trying to change to the decimal anyway. But it's like 60 pennies. So that's 60 cents, right? So we're done. That's 60 cents. So it's 0.60. Or you can look at it like this. When you multiply by 60 by 0.01, remember it's 2 places behind the decimal point, so I can go 1, 2 to the left and still get 0.6. All right. Well, that's 6/10. This is red 6/10, right? But if we got to change it to the fraction, well, that's 6/10 as the fraction. But that reduces down to 3/5 because you divide top and bottom, or you take half of top and bottom and you get this. So that's how that would go. So this ain't so bad right now, right? So let's go to the next example. Next example, this time they give you the decimal number, which is 1 penny, right? But that's 1/100, right? But then to write as a percent, remember, it's whatever it is over 100 is that number, the numerator percent, right? So it'll be 1%. Because we talked about that in the last lesson, right? But then going the other way, if you want to write it back as a fraction, we know it's 1/100th anyway to begin with. So 1/100. So that's taken care of. Okay. So what about 65%? 65%. When you want to write a percent as the decimal, right? We could have just went 65.01, right? And then 65 cents. So, but you're given a fraction first. You're given this first, and you got to come up with these things. So if you're given a fraction, you got to get the decimal and the percent. Well, to go from the fraction to the decimal, you take the bottom to the top. So you see the long division there to give me the 65, right? 20 going to 130 6 times, and it's 2 times 6 is 12, 120, And you see the 20 going to 500, or 20 going to 105 times. So you see the 0.65 there. Now, once you get the 0.65, you know, to write as a percent, it's, remember, 65 hundredths, right? Which is 65%. So this time they give you the percent, which is this number, right? Which is 0.1%. But you got to write it as a decimal. Well, we know the percent sign itself is 0.01. And I just slid this over, right? But when you multiply decimals, right, you count the number of places behind. So it's 3. And 1 times 1 is 1. So you got to go back, what? To the left, 3. 1, 2, 3. So that would be the answer to this top number up here. And of course, we know that's 1/1000th in place value. So that's what the fraction is. So the last one is a little bit trickier because we're given a fraction as the problem and we got to get the other thing. So that's 2/3. But when you take the bottom to the top, though, you get the 0.6 repeating part. And I didn't